Ah, what are you doing in my swamp? Oh well, I forgot. This is a movie review for YouTube. Hey, little Shrek tribute. Don't know if you like it, but if you do, great. Anyway, Shrek Forever After. So this is apparently the fourth and last installment of the Shrek franchise. Yeah, we believe that. Anyways, so this film once again focuses on Shrek, and this time around we find that his life seems to be perfect for any typical male guy with a wife who loves him, kids and friends who adore him. So, you figure for any male guy that'd be the great setup. But to Shrek it isn't satisfactory enough, so he decides he wants a day of his old life back at the beginning of the first movie, where he was an real ogre, everyone hated him, didn't know who he was, and just was terrified and ran away from him. So of course, you know, that's what Shrek wants. And he tricked, and Rumpelstiltskin comes in, who is mad of course that Shrek has now rescued Princess Fiona and prevented him from getting the kingdom, when in fact this time he tricks Shrek by getting him a little bit hammered. He just tricks him into signing over the day of his birth. Therefore, by resulting in the fact that because he was never born, everything's changed, and now Rumpelstiltskin's king, until of course Shrek can try and find out a way to make the world right again, by making Fiona fall in love with him all over again, and undoing all of his wrong deeds. So that's the plot of Shrek Forever After. So what did I think of Shrek Forever After? Let's get into it. Now first let's get a quick recap on what I think on Shrek, Shrek 2, Shrek the Third. Shrek 1 and 2 are two of the best animated films I've literally ever seen. You know, they are so funny beyond belief that I cannot even begin to describe how. The comedy is original, genuine, and just gut-bustingly hilarious. And I'm copying other reviewers' sayings, but I don't care. Shrek 1 and 2 have gut-bustingly hilarious scenes, and my favourite scene of the whole franchise still remains in the second film, where Shrek and Donkey meet Puss in Boots in the forest. That is literally the best, and that's my favourite time scene in an animated film. Shrek the Third. Now a lot of people call this Shrek the Turd, and I can sort of understand why. I enjoyed Shrek the Third, but I didn't enjoy it nowhere near as much as the first two movies. So going into Shrek Forever After, I had mixed expectations. Some people say they loved it, and others loathed the shit out of it. So which side do I stand on? You'll find that out. So let's get into the pros. Now the acting is extremely better this time around as opposed to Shrek the Third. Mike Myers, Cameron Diaz, Eddie Murphy, Antonio Banderas, they're all really comfortable with their roles, and is considering that because they've been playing it consistently for 4 films. And they seem much comfortable with what they're doing. They know their characters well enough by now. And it was interesting to see the little twists of how the relationships have changed. In other words, how none of the main characters know Shrek at this point. So that was a real plus right there. And additional to the voice cast, Walt Dawn perfecting. He's just so perfect at doing the voice of Rumpelstiltskin. Now let's be honest, Shrek hasn't had the most interesting villains, particularly Shrek the Third. Prince Charming sucked. But you know, Rumpelstiltskin I think is easily the best Shrek villain yet to date. And I think that he had the most charisma, wisdom, wit, and attitude, and he also had the right bit of menacing charisma for it as well. So that was a plus there, as I really felt for Shrek and all of his main friends. And also one of the plus about the film, now that we get off the voice acting, which is still pretty perfect, the direction by Mike Mitchell is pretty much perfect in this movie. And I really found that some of the camera angles, camera shots, and even some of the animation, it's very crisp. It never feels out of focus, out of tone, and it never feels there for no reason. The pacing was very, very, well, for the most part, very good. I found that from beginning to end, I was pretty much thoroughly entertained. I was glued to the screen. So, another plus there. The action is much better this time around. In the first 2 Shrek films, the action was fairly decent, and in the third one, let's be honest, it was building up to a climax, and pretty much which nothing happened. So, I liked how the action played out in this movie. Now, the last thing is that the animation, of course, is still crisp, and usually it's an achievement because Disney Pixar is usually the masters of animation. Usually they get every detail to the dot. The Shrek series is a good example of how it doesn't necessarily have to be just the Pixar films. And it's the same with How to Train Your Dragon and the majority of other DreamWorks animated films, now that I come to think of it. The character development as well is much better. The two final things I'll mention. Well, 3 final things. which is that, first of which is that this film is a lot darker than the other Shrek films. I like how it took a little twist. Unfortunately, it turned that it was at the expense of humour, but it was still pretty funny. Another thing was that I think the character development was very well done. You felt for these characters through beginning through to end. And the final thing is the script was pretty well written, I thought. So that's that done. Now let's get into the very rare cons, which I did not like about Shrek Forever After. Sometimes, to me, the biggest problem I have with Shrek Forever After, it felt too much like a kid's film sometimes. And people are going to find that comment extremely weird. But the problem with Shrek Forever After for me, watching the first two Shrek films, I didn't feel I was watching a kids movie. I felt I was watching a movie that both adults and kids could appeal to. Yes, I was appealed by Shrek Forever After, I'll give it that. But I didn't have that same feeling I had with the first two movies. In some places it just felt too much like a kids film. You know, the humour is still top-notch here, or more or less, but there could have been a bit more adult humour in there, and I really felt that it just fell flat in terms of adult humour. But overall, though, ladies and gentlemen, Shrek Forever After is definitely not a return for a quick buck. It definitely fulfills its purpose, and it is a fantastic conclusion to the franchise. I still love Shrek Forever After. It's Shrek, come on. You know, so overall, I'm going to give it 4.5 stars out of 5. I mean, and the first two films I gave 5 stars, the third one I gave 3.5. So it's better than Shrek the Third, just slightly short of the first two. But it's still, and with it, even though it's at the expense of some adult humour, the darkness and the action I think makes up for it, and you know, the character development is still pretty good. And it does have heart as well, which is another thing I forgot to mention I like about it. So, if this is the final Shrek film, I'm glad that they've gone out with a bang. They've gone out with a good note, and I'm proud of the franchise. Even Shrek the Third, but the franchise in general is great. So, until my next movie review, I shall sign out of my swamp.